I really want people to walk away today with sort of like a step-by-step, just so they can understand all the steps that's involved with getting your utilities and your entitlement process. How do you explain at a high level, what are the steps in the process to getting a project entitled?
When you're getting the utilities, so at that point, you've had your project submitted to the city. So you've got your team going through that. You've now taken your application. You've worked with the architect. You've worked with the MEP to prepare the application. So that's typically a load sheet, an application, and a set of plans. Site plan that shows conceptually, here's where it's at. Here's where we'd like you to set the transformer. Here's where we'd like you to set the meters. And then you submit that to the utility department. You will be waiting in the queue a lot. They're going to do an initial evaluation and see what is the most likely scenario that we can feed this project from. So you'll be going through the design process at the utility company, and you'll go back and forth and trade some information. And during that time, typically someone from the utility department is going to physically go out and verify where they think they're tapping from is going to work. So you'll have some iteration back and forth. The biggest mistake I see most people making is when they work their development in silos. They're going through the city process, they're getting entitlements, they're working on permits, they're working on the city side of it, but they're not incorporating the utility portion of the design. Constantly coordinate your design through the design process with everyone involved in the project. So the more you can communicate, the better. But I think generally just knowing that you need to figure out who your utility providers are. You need to get the will serve letter that just proves they can serve the area. You'll get a final utility design. Make sure you cross-reference with the rest of the design team that there's no conflicts. You'll get a final contract. And then you want to take that final design and make sure that gets in the GC bid package. So that way they're not just looking at that reference point that the civil engineer put on their plan, but the actual full-blown design. So specs and everything are not missed. And the GC can't come back and say, oh, I didn't know that. Put it in the bid package, get it in the GC contract, give them proper turnover. So out of all of that, the biggest thing that anyone can do is over-communicate. Share all the information and over-communicate with people, and you're setting your team up for success.
Okay, welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Guys, today we got an OG. We got Kristi Kandel. She's back on a podcast from, if you haven't seen her story from the prior podcast, make sure you go back and listen to that one, because today we're getting even deeper. We're getting even into the details. There is no fluff that's going to come out from this episode, only value. So, Kristi, welcome back to the podcast today. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing awesome. Sun's out. It's warm. We're good.
Let's go. I mean, I've been really looking forward to this podcast, and I was always wondering, when you told me about what you specialize in entitlements, and then you told me you had all this expertise around dry utilities, and the timing was perfect. I was literally talking to another developer, and he was telling me how it was taking him like 10 months. Some of his friends were taking 18 months just to get power to the site. It's scary what that can do in terms of cost of money, cost of interest reserves. I mean, that could be really scary. But before we get into all those details, Kristi, for people that don't know you, who are you? How did you get into real estate in the first place?
So I have actually been a real estate developer for almost the past 20 years, but I accidentally fell into it. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and after college, I'm like, hey, I'm moving to the beaches in Florida. It just so happens that I fell into development, ended up working with a real estate developer who was doing the CVS pharmacies. They had retail tenants, so we were doing CVS Pharmacy, Chase Bank, Family Dollar, Publix. And about 2 weeks after I started working with the developer in the Tampa area, I get a call, and part of their team's in California. And they're like, hey, can you do the sign code and the landscape research for us? Family Dollar wants to build their first locations out here. Yes, because I saw opportunity, a chance to maybe open a new market with them. So about 6 months after that, I was able to convince my company that I should be the person to go and open our office, since I was the only one without a spouse and multiple kids, and ended up in 2010 opening our office in Orange County, California. For the next 4 years, from San Francisco to San Diego, I was developing 30 Family Dollars a year. So from the time the real estate guys got the dirt under contract, I was coming in, doing the due diligence with the city, finding the architects and engineers, going through the entitlements, the permitting, and even the construction management. And it was through that, because on the East Coast, we didn't need dry utility consultants, but it was through that I realized, oh, like that's just as extensive and as intensive of a process as it is going through the city part to get utilities, to get the power, gas, and telecom to properties. So ended up taking that in-house and managing that myself. Fast forward, worked for a developer in Newport Beach for a year where we built industrial, multifamily, mixed use in downtown, and realized, wait, it's all the same steps as these single tenant retail clients. And so in 2015, I had the confidence then to start my own company. 10 years later, we've done tons of rollout programs with hydrogen clients, with Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, with Chick-fil-A. And yeah, now we teach locals how to become developers in their own backyard as well.
Ooh, that is what a freaking story. I mean, just going from doing such specialized work, taking a leap of faith on yourself. I don't even think it was a leap. I think you knew exactly what you were doing. But now that you're into this world of teaching people how to develop real estate locally, I mean, you must get certain questions, right? And when people ask you, Kristi, like, what do entitlements even mean? Or sometimes it's like a big keyword, it's jargon. How do you explain entitlements to people?
It's interesting. I was just at a conference and someone mentioned to me, they said, did you know that some people, the only job they do in development is entitlements? And I was like, well, yes, I do, because that's my bread and butter. That's actually the part I enjoy the most of the development process, because that's like a chess match, a poker game, playing detective all at once. And what it basically means when you're entitling a property is you want to do a certain use on that specific piece of land. And so when you entitle it, when you get the zoning approvals, that means that the city is also agreeing that you can build what you want to build on that property. Now, it doesn't mean that you've got the plans completely drawn up. It doesn't mean that they're permitted. You can start construction tomorrow, but at least everyone has agreed that what you want to do there can be done. And that is a huge, huge first step to cross.
That is so good, because I tell people all the time, that's where you can get so much value added to your property. Because when you get that stamp of approval from the city or the county, I mean, you're essentially signaling that this land is now ripe, is ready to build, and that increases the value dramatically. And sometimes people forget, sometimes it's a lot of work, but it's also the paper side of the work, not the construction side of the work yet. So I love how you explain entitlements. What are dry utilities then in real estate development? That can probably be pretty self-explanatory sometimes, but not everybody understands the terminology. So I want to hear from you. What are dry utilities in development, and why do they matter so much during an entitlement phase?
So dry utilities are your power, your gas, and your telecom. So you think of your phone and internet to a property. And the reason they're so important is that we often overlook. I get so many calls when people are too far into a project and it's like, oh yeah, we need to get power, we need to get internet, or we need to get gas. And we realize that it's often the redheaded stepchild of a project, because people think, oh, well, there's an existing building here, it must be fine. So making sure you have the proper utilities is so key, because you don't know when that prior building was built. You don't know. Most likely the infrastructure has been upgraded in the meantime. You're going to need more power than you did in the past. And so it's such a key part of a project, but often overlooked. And the biggest tip I can give someone just straight off the bat is plan space for the power for your site for the transformer. And you'd think, oh, well, I'm just going to get it from a pole on the street. And you go, no, we don't have pole mounted transformers anymore, and especially not for the size of power that most developments are going to need. So the larger developments will need a pad mounted transformer, and maybe it's an 8x10 pad. That takes up a lot of room when you're thinking about building in downtown LA or San Francisco or any city where land is so valuable.
And pad, you're talking about like an 8 feet by 10 feet transformer. Okay. This is going to be good, because now people are going to be like, well, Kristi, I see these electric poles around me all the time. Why do you need a transformer? Help explain that to people. Like, why do I need a dedicated transformer for a specific development?
So each property is going to need, so the lines you see, that's the utility company's infrastructure. But then you need your dedicated point of connection that's going to power your project specifically. And what you do between the loads that you need and what the utility company is doing is they're designing in your loads to meet their overall capacity, their overall infrastructure. And you've got that hub that's going to be powering your site. Without that, you can't energize your project site. And there's a lot more technical nuances that go into that, but that is your point of connection. That is how you get power to your property.
Ooh, okay. And now this is going to lead to a larger overall question on how early you should plan around dry utilities. But is that transformer supposed to be there already when you're starting construction so that it can power the construction site? Like, how early should that transformer be in place? And now I'm going to take it up a level.
Yeah, so the transformer itself, you want it on when we were talking about entitlements. Those are your paper plans. That's where you're designing where everything fits. So you need that space for it. But you're not actually going to be setting that transformer and getting the final utility and building sign-offs until further into construction. So you're going to end up getting temp power. And we normally will have the general contractor apply for the temporary power to power the site as you're building it. But there's certain sign-offs with the building department and with the utility department for you to actually set the transformer and then to later get it energized. So there will definitely be 2 sets of power that you will need for the project.
Ooh, okay, this is so good. This is like a $50,000 like real estate development course right here that we're sharing with all of you that are listening. All right, let's talk about, well, how early should developers start planning for dry utility access, like power, gas, like cable and telecom? And how early should they start?
You should start when you're site planning and you're doing due diligence on the project from the beginning. Like I said, you need placeholders for the transformer on the site plan, but at the same time, you need to be going out and collecting your utility will serve letters. What that means is you're identifying who's providing the utilities for my property. And this will include, I know we're talking dry utilities, but this includes water and sewer as well, but also power, gas, and telecom. And what you're doing is you're identifying who am I going to be working with, who's designing these to our site. And with that, your will serve letter is something you get at the beginning, and it just says we have the ability to provide service to your property. It doesn't tell you where it's at. It doesn't tell you if they can actually meet the loads that you have. It just says, hey, we're the provider in the area. Step further from that is that then you're going to need to figure out where's the point of connection. And again, this all happens during due diligence. You want to find the point of connection for several reasons, but mostly you're checking to see, are you going to have extensive off-site improvements that are required? Is your power across a 4-lane road? Is your telecom 400 feet down the sidewalk and now you're trenching up the public right of way? So yeah, early on in due diligence, you want to figure out who the providers are and where the points of connection are. And those are things you can get for just your time. That's going to identify a lot of key risks in the project, and there's ways that you can mitigate that around. And then going forward from there, you're going to want to start your actual utility application to the power company the minute you submit your first entitlement package. So once you submit that, you've dialed in, here's the site plan that we're going to the city with, and you're then taking that and submitting to the power company and saying, here is where we'd like to pull power. So that it's going to start a much longer process. On the West Coast, our main utilities are PG&E, SDG&E, LADWP, and SCE, all names for power companies that are out west, the big guys. There are tons of smaller ones. The general timeline to get that done, though, is anywhere from 9 to 15 months to get the final design. And once you have that design, you still have to go into construction then. So when people don't start during due diligence and submit the package during entitlements, you're just setting yourself up to have a fire drill on the back end that is completely unnecessary if you plan accordingly.
And sometimes it's out of your control because this timeline, you're just in the queue for the utility providers. So let me continue asking. So you talked about when you submit to the utility company, right? But before that, you were talking about the will serve letter. Some people might be asking right now, Kristi, how much information do I need to provide just to begin that conversation, right? Do they just need to say, hey, I think roughly 200 units and this is why I'm reaching out today? How much information should they have before they approach utility company?
You can approach the utility as soon as you go, hey, we found this piece of land and we're going to build somewhere between 40 to 150 units or 200. They just need a conceptual one, because what you're doing at that point is you're establishing who is the provider, who is my main point of contact? And sometimes it can take you weeks to figure those two things out and get someone to call you back. So those are the key things that you're trying to do, because you're conceptually just trying to make them aware of the project. And what they're going to know as the planner, as they're designing all the other infrastructure around your project, is, did I just develop a project in this area and design power to it, and I knew we had an issue? Did I know we just tapped out our capacity? You're wanting that high level, like in case they have an immediate red flag before you've spent very much money on the project at all. It does not mean you will get power. It does not mean you won't have issues, but you're mitigating risk, which is everything we do in development, is how do we mitigate risk along the way?
Wow. And I think that could save you, all of you that's listening right now, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, just by getting ahead of it.
And honestly, millions isn't an exaggeration. I know you kind of alluded to it earlier, but there's been projects where they said, we're done with construction, and just realized we don't have power. They thought their contractor would handle it. And then they said, oh yeah, it's got to go into utility design. And they had to start the whole process, and it took them 18 months. And there isn't really expediting. You can try and call in every favor you have, but there really isn't expediting of the power design process. And 18 months. Think about all of that lost rent and the carrying costs. And if it was a retail project, your tenants have penalties. So it can get very, very, very costly.
Wow. So I think this is probably leading to my next question. Perfect segue. So obviously not planning ahead is a big one. So what are the biggest mistakes that developers typically make when it comes to getting these dry utilities approved? What else do they typically mess up on?
One, not planning on where the transformer goes. Two, not starting early enough. And most of that, so the not starting early enough is the major one. And it's because as you're going through entitlements, most likely, let's say we're talking a housing project, you only have an architect involved. You don't have the MEP, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineer involved yet in the project. That's the person who's going to design the actual loads to each unit that's inside the building. So that's the information you need to technically submit your utility app. So as developers are going through the entitlement process, they're trying to not spend a ton of money up front. So they've got their architect engaged, they're going through the city process. And what they don't understand is that as they're going through entitlements, that's a 6 to 12 to 18 plus month period where they could be gaining time on the power design at that point. By getting the MEP in early and saying, hey, all we want you to do in your scope and your proposal is there's 200 units, give us the loads for these so we can submit the application to the utility providers, to power. And if you have gas, a lot of times now we're not doing gas to housing projects, we're using all electric appliances, but getting those loads in so you can start the process is a couple $1,000s that is well spent, that will save you so much time on the back end.
Wow. Okay. So getting the MEP engineer, that's going to be super important at the beginning. People might be asking now, well, how do I pick the right MEP engineer? Do you have any pro tips on how should people assemble that part of their team? Like, should they just be hiring someone like you and you can tap in your network? Like, how might someone like you find the best MEP engineer for a housing project in a specific area?
For me, it starts with the architect. The architect is your lead consultant, especially out west, and they're going to be driving the overall project and most likely managing the other consultants. You want someone that they've worked with before, that they're familiar with, and typically someone who has done that exact product with them. So it could be an architect firm that, hey, we do retail, hey, we do industrial, we do residential. Who are your MEPs that you work with that are on the housing side who can help us design this? Because you want to take down the learning curve of everyone on your team. Just because they're a civil engineer, just because they're an MEP, just because they're an architect doesn't mean that they necessarily specialize in that asset class that you're doing. And you don't want to be their learning curve. So getting an MEP is from your architect is key. I also have, because we have a dry utility division of our company, I have a handful of MEPs that I've worked with, and I have our go-to one that has done rollout program after rollout program with us. So if a developer comes to us and says, we don't have our MEP yet, do you have one you'd recommend? Then we'll give them, especially in the West Coast, we have ours that we'll give to them as an option, and it's up to them to make the business decision, but we'll at least give some referrals.
Wow. And this is the benefit of working with a pro like Kristi, who's gotten projects approved before, that has a proven Rolodex of people. I mean, sometimes people underestimate how much of development is really about relationships and having the right relationships to people with the right Rolodex that will save you literally millions of dollars at the very minimum. So, Kristi, this is so good. I've learned so much in like less than 15 minutes. It's wild. And I really want people to walk away today with sort of like a step-by-step, just so they can understand all the steps that's involved with getting your utilities and your entitlement process. So how do you explain at a high level, what are the steps in the process to getting a project entitled? What are they? And maybe we can just talk about the steps at a high level, and then we can dive a little bit deeper into the steps afterwards.
And getting the project entitled through the city with zoning, or the utility portion of that?
Let's talk about the utilities.
Yeah, so when you're getting the utilities, so at that point, you've had your project submitted to the city. So you've got your team going through that. You've now taken your application. You've worked with the architect. You've worked with the MEP to prepare the application. So that's typically a load sheet, an application, and a set of plans. Site plan that shows conceptually, here's where it's at. Here's where we'd like you to set the transformer. Here's where we'd like you to set the meters. And then you submit that to the utility department. During that time, you will be waiting in the queue a lot. They're going to do an initial evaluation and see what is the most likely scenario that we can feed this project from. So you'll be going through the design process at the utility company, and you'll go back and forth and trade some information. And during that time, typically someone from the utility department is going to physically go out and verify where they think they're tapping from is going to work. So you'll have some iteration back and forth. Most utilities are going to come back with a preliminary design, and that's them saying, okay, conceptually, here's what we could do. The biggest mistake I see most people making is when they work their development in silos. They're going through the city process, they're getting entitlements, they're working on permits, they're working on the city side of it, but they're not incorporating the utility portion of the design. So when you get that preliminary design, the first thing that we do, so my team, we actually build out our own dry utility project management software. So the minute we get the design, there's coordination that then happens with the design team. So you're working with the developer, with the architect, with the civil engineer, and you're saying, here's where we want to put our dry utilities. Because there's different rules for how far apart you can put your dry utilities and your wet utilities, both horizontally and vertically underground. And you want to make sure that the city didn't move a driveway on them, and now you've got this power line that's running through part of the building, and now it's completely reworked. So you'll go through a prelim design, make sure you coordinate with the design team. You'll go through to a final design. Again, you want to do the same thing there, because that's where they're going to add different things, like maybe a switch is required for the property. And so that's an extra tiny little pad mounted switch that needs to be there to power because you have a big enough project. And these are all things that are engineered by the utility company based on their existing infrastructure. So lots of coordination throughout. And then what you want to do is you want everyone to sign off. You want your engineer to sign off. You want your architect to sign off. You want the developer to sign off, because they're all looking at it from a different perspective. And you want to make sure there are no conflicts, because once you get in the field and your contractor is starting to build it, you want to make that as streamlined as possible, because otherwise, if there's field conflicts and your superintendent is going, why do you have this water line going directly under our transformer pad? Now what do I do? And now you're frozen in the field and you're losing money, because now you have to completely rework the design, which means going back to the utility provider, going back to the city to update the permit plans. Time is money. So you've got prelim design, final design. Once everyone signs off, then you'll get the contract. And at that point, then you've officially finished the planning part of getting utilities to the property. And then you go into the construction part. And depending on the utility provider, you could have a lead time of another 6 to 8 to 12 weeks before anyone can even get to you in the field. And then once you do that, there's different phases for, okay, well, now you can put in the underground, you can do the transformer pad, we'll do that inspection. We need to get certain sign-offs, we'll set the transformer. And then at that point, you don't have your meters yet. The transformer is a huge phase, but for you to actually get your meters set, then there's additional inspections and coordination with the building department, because they're not going to let you energize the property until it's ready and fully safe and good to go. So there's quite a bit of coordination that goes through there. And so the two biggest takeaways that I would recommend to anyone is constantly coordinate your design through the design process with everyone involved in the project. And during construction, have pre-construction meetings, constantly be talking to your inspectors, giving them the heads up, hey, in about 2 weeks, we're going to be ready. They can put it on their schedules so that way you're not held up by them saying, oh, well, I'm 4 weeks out. So the more you can communicate, the better.
This is so good. And I tell people all the time, Kristi's the expert here. I specialize in underwriting. I specialize in creative deal structuring, but I have no idea all this technical coordination that's going on. And that's why you really want someone that has the knowledge like Kristi has. And when I think about being on these meetings, right, I think that could just scare a lot of people. Kristi, just how you explained this one, people could be like, oh my goodness, there's so many steps. For me, when I join these meetings and whenever there are problems that come up, you can now refer to this conversation with Kristi and say, wow, I learned this from Kristi and I should be asking these questions. For me, I just took this $50,000 course from Kristi in the last 20 minutes. And now I can at least be knowledgeable on these calls. Because now I can at least say, hey, I don't really know what that means, but can you explain to me what the implications are on my budget and my timeline is with option A, B, or C? That's how I try to understand the situation. And I try to be the least smart person in the room, but able to ask the questions and understand, especially if you're underwriting the project, like, hey, what's this going to do to my holding costs? What's this going to do to the overall ROI on the project? Because now if I'm spending a little bit more money on putting a transformer in, that might cost me $200,000 and I have to trench this over there. That's the implications that I care about when I underwrite these projects. So take that mindset. You can have very different skill sets when it comes to development, but listen to what Kristi has shared with you, because now you can approach these conversations and say, hey, at least now I know what type of questions to ask. And at least now I know how to make sure I'm coordinating well with everybody that's involved. So Kristi, this is a great segue because you talked about the problem earlier where you had a water line underneath the transformer. And I was like, whoa, that seems like common sense. But do you typically see people handling utilities on both the wet and dry together? Do you see a separation of duties there? Like, how should people think about managing the other side of dry utilities, namely the wet utilities?
It's typically separate. So your horizontal improvements, so anything with the ground, the grading, anything that's underground, stormwater, all of that, is by your civil engineer. And what they're designing is they're designing the project, and that includes the water and the sewer, but they're working in their silo. And because the utility providers for power, gas, and telecom all design their own infrastructure, then that's kind of in a separate bucket. So making that communication and coordination happen is something that is the developer's responsibility, but they don't necessarily always know that's their job. They assume that the architect or the civil engineer, they assume, hey, I told you to handle utilities. And the civil engineer said, yeah, my idea of utilities is water and sewer. It's not telecom, gas, or power, because that's by the power company and that's by the gas company. So that's just where having someone experienced on your team can help you understand where the gaps in scope are. And that's honestly where most issues happen, is when people make an assumption just because they haven't been there before. And so they assume that it's in there, and that's where the costly instances happen.
Oh, that was such a good lesson when you assume that person was going to take care of it, and then they're like, it wasn't in my scope. I'm just water and sewer. Oh my goodness, that was so good, Kristi. You just helped so many people. I know for a fact that helped so many people. Someone must be writing that right now and saying, I'm never going to make that mistake. I better double check and ask that question. Okay, well.
And then,
Kristi, go ahead.
I was going to say, so once they do that, then a common pushback you'll get from the civil engineer is, well, I am not the engineer who designed that, so that shouldn't go on my plans. And that's correct. But at the same time, you need to make sure that it's coordinated on their plans and it's one of the layers. And there's at least a line that says, hey, here's where the power is going, because then they can see, oh, shoot, the water is actually 2.5 feet away. So now we need to shift. And let me tell you, utilities are super easy to shift when it's on paper. When you're out in the field and you've already dug the trenches, the cost to move something 2.5 feet is exponentially more expensive, both with the change order costs, because everyone slaps up a nice hefty number and price on there, but also with the time you've lost. And the time is the most important part. So it's just like when they say measure twice, cut once. It's the same thing with make sure you have designed and cross-coordinated every single utility, so that way you've captured it. So what we'll do is we'll have coordination meetings throughout a project with the whole design team. And it could be something as simple as, hey, the irrigation lines are actually in the way of this power line. Super easy to move, something easy to do on paper. But when it comes to actually locating it on the plans, what you want to do is have the civil engineer show it as a reference point and say, refer to final PG&E drawing or refer to that, but this is for reference only. And then that way it's not included under their license, their insurance, their anything, but it's shown on the plan. Because a lot of times what that will show you too is if there's potential to put telecom in the same trench as power. And so when you think about that, you're like, okay, well, whatever, that doesn't sound like much. Well, when you're trenching, your power is going to go 3 feet deep. Then your gas goes 2 feet deep and your telecom goes 1 foot deep. And if you're only digging one trench, you're saving a ton of money and time, and especially on tight site. So there's so many things that just by putting it on the site plan that you're going to see to potentially value engineer your project as well.
Oh, this is so good. I'm so jazzed for this conversation. I literally can't contain the amount of information and the value I'm getting from this conversation right now, Kristi. I'm like shaking in my seat. You have no idea, Kristi. I was like, this is so good. Like, people don't understand. I'm such a geek when it comes to this stuff, but that was so good. Like, just like taking advantage of how you dig the trenches and how much time you can save and how much value you can get. Oh, that is such good value engineering. It's so different than what other people are talking about right now, where they're like, oh, value engineering is trying to, how do I get 200 units and turn it into 220 units? And they don't think about the gems that you just dropped right here. Like, that is so fire. Oh, that's so good, Kristi. Oh God, can you tell I love this stuff?
You geek out on this like I do.
All right, Kristi. So let's talk about will the approach to utilities ever differ for an affordable housing project versus a market rate project? It seems like the steps are pretty the same, but just curious. I had to throw that question out there.
It typically won't differ, and if it does, it differs in your favor. An example is we're working on a affordable housing project in LA, and the mayor of LA mandated 2 things. They mandated that the building department approve the permit plans within, I think it was a 60-day period. Well, that's only beneficial if your 18 to 24 months of power also gets greatly reduced, because it will take you that long to get power. So who cares if I get building permits in 60 days if I'm 2 years out from power? Well, LADWP is a very political entity, and they will do what the mayor says and prioritize it. So we have actually seen firsthand. We were like, all right, this is the true test. Can it happen? And I'll be damned if LADWP didn't give us a final design, a mostly final design within that 60-day period, because that was a priority, because we were able to show it was truly an affordable housing project that met the mayor's requirements. So then they prioritized it on their list.
Oh, and this was the ED1 directive? Is that the one?
I believe it was.
Okay. And did you get it in 60 days?
We did. It was, we actually sat back and we're like, are you kidding me? And we told the client, because we were doing the dry utility portion for it, and we said, if this is true, and if they are truly fast tracking it, our fee will only be this. If we have to go through the typical DWP process, our fee will be much higher. And we were able to go, guys, we got it. Like, we're good to go. Our fee is our much smaller fee because they truly prioritized it and fast tracked it. You don't need us for the full length of time.
This is so good. You literally helped me prove the case of why everybody should at least look at an affordable housing deal to see just how much time we just saved by being affordable. I mean, this is literally the phrase I tell people is like, hey, sometimes when you look at it from an affordable side, that deal might be a deal for you. That might not be a deal for some luxury class A developer, because of the fact that just you are able to save millions of dollars by not having to wait 9-15 months for approval on a project. That is wild. So, Kristi, I want to kind of bring this into what kind of tools or checklists do you recommend that can help manage all the utility approval process? Like, how do you go about managing? I know you said you had some software, but are there any tools or checklists that you recommend for people to have when they are managing the utility approval process for the large housing projects?
So there really aren't any, which is there aren't any standard ones that you can go out and grab that. So we created a lot of our own internal specific to here's how you progress through with PG&E, SCE, SDG&E. Here's the checklist that we have. So we do have internal checklists. And honestly, if you have people that reach out to you and say, hey, I would love if there was a checklist on this part of the process, I have no problem shooting it over to you if it's helpful. But I would say for any project that you're doing, if you have a matrix, just create a matrix. And honestly, if you're the developer, you should have it for the full team, but have it for the utility companies too. And then that way you go, okay, for this project, I've got SCE on power. This is my planner for the process. Here's the inspector for the field, because you're going to be using that during the design process, but you're going to pass that on to the contractor during construction. And it blows my mind, but a lot of times the information that's done on paper during entitlements and permits doesn't make it to the field team. And so they're calling up, they're trying to figure out who's my point of contact? How do I do this? There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Just make sure you're passing off the information to the construction team. So we always do two things. We do a dry utility concept plan, and that's where we put the power, gas, and telecom on one plan for the contractor so they can see this is where it's at. We have our matrix of that, and then we hold a turnover meeting and we notify. We actually set that up with the contractor and with the utility providers, and we say, let's have a pre-construction meeting for utilities only. And we're going to set it up to where you're all in the field, because we're trying to tee up that contractor as efficiently as possible so they can take that over. But I think generally just knowing that you need to figure out who your utility providers are. You need to get the will serve letter that just proves they can serve the area. You'll get a final utility design. Make sure you cross-reference with the rest of the design team that there's no conflicts. You'll get a final contract. And then you want to take that final design and make sure that gets in the GC bid package. So that way they're not just looking at that reference point that the civil engineer put on their plan, but the actual full-blown design. So specs and everything are not missed. And the GC can't come back and say, oh, I didn't know that. Put it in the bid package, get it in the GC contract, give them proper turnover. So out of all of that, the biggest thing that anyone can do is over-communicate. Share all the information and over communicate with people, and you're setting your team up for success.
Oh, that's so good. I mean, over communication, I love that word, because sometimes people underestimate how important that is. I mean, would that be your number one? I guess the larger question is, what advice do you have or would you give to new developers that might be trying to entitle land for the first time, right? Especially in regards to utilities. What would be your top takeaway for them that they should be working on this week to get ahead?
To talk with whoever your lead consultant is. You're building a team. As a developer, you're building a team. So maybe you have an architect, maybe you have a civil engineer, and just ask them, what all do we need for this project? What other consultants are we going to need to take this start to finish? And start to see, because they'll be like, oh yeah, well, I guess we need a landscape architect. I guess we need a site laid photometric plan, I guess. And they're going to say all of these things, and just flat out ask them. They're your partner, but they're thinking in their silo. And so you as the developer are helping translate and cross over to all of them. So just start with each one and ask, what are we going to need to take this project, not just through entitlements, but through permitting and through construction, and start to ask those questions to say, who else do we need on this team? And then, like you said earlier, development is all about relationships. So talk to people like you. Talk to people who are doing similar projects and say, hey, what were your lessons learned? These are all things you can do without spending a dime. Yes, you could hire consultants like my firm, but at the same time, use your local network and leverage that, and leverage the people you're already hiring to see, and you'll end up finding those gaps in scope by just having a conversation. No one expects the developer to know it all. It is refreshing when you go into the city or hire architects and engineers, then they go, oh yeah, I don't have to educate you. But they are used to educating you. They understand that you're not going to know it. You're not the licensed person. You're not the person who went to school for this forever. So don't feel stupid. Ask the question. You're going to save so much time and money. I promise it's worth it.
Oh, you just gave so many people permission to say, I don't need to be a know-it-all, right? I don't need to be that person. I can rely on my team. And maybe I'll ask another $1 million question for you, Kristi, is how might you recommend someone building out their team? Is there some place that you recommend for them to search to figure out, like, hey, how long did it take this person or this architect from initial plans to getting the whole project approved, right? How might you recommend people doing their research to find that initial lead consultant, like an architect or a civil engineer?
Yeah, we one of our tools that we do have there are 5 strategic partners: your architect, your engineer, your broker, your contractor, and your lender. But it's all the same general process of, first you want to find someone who specializes in that asset class, because multifamily is different than industrial, is different than mixed use. So you want to make sure that you're not their learning curve. Especially when it comes to affordable, there are architects who specialize in LIHTC and affordable housing projects. You want them to have that knowledge. They're going to actually help you with the application process in ways that an architect who has no experience is not going to be able to help you. So I would say when it comes to affordable housing, your architect is your main key, because you want them to be super knowledgeable on that exact product type. They don't need to be incredibly local to the jurisdiction because they are the vertical construction part, but with it being affordable, you want it to be in the same region. And then from there, A players recommend A players. So if you know, I have this killer architect, they're not going to recommend a C civil engineer who just wastes everyone's time, drags their feet, and is always 2 months late on plans. So once you find those good ones, you start to get their referrals. You talk to the consultants, and you ask and you say, who have you worked with? Who have you developed with? And talk to the developer who did that and hear their experience. Now, take everything with a grain of salt, but it's just like you're getting referrals or references for anything else. Make sure you do your due diligence. You are going into a 2 to 5 to 6 year project with these people. I would much rather spend a little bit more time up front doing my due diligence to make sure I have the right partner on my team than getting halfway into a project, needing to completely pause, realize they can't do it, and aren't meeting deadlines and needing to fire them and bring someone else in. That is way more painful. So invest more early on building the right team and getting referrals, but that's going to be your key.
Oh, what a mic drop. I freaking love that. That was so good, Kristi. I mean, Kristi, you have provided so much value to the audience today. And I am so grateful that you came onto the podcast today. You have taught me so much in just less than an hour. And Kristi, for people that want to learn more from you, like, what are you working on right now? How can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so I do development. I also have a company who does consulting, both for entitlements, permitting, dry utility work. We do stop at permit issuance and then let the developer and their construction team take over. So we have that. And then one of my fun projects is, because I've done hundreds of development projects, mostly on the West Coast, and I realized I've lived in small towns everywhere I've been, whether it's Ohio or Florida or Lake Tahoe. And our communities are desperate for our locals to be the ones taking the lead. And having done hundreds of projects, it's completely possible. To be able to empower our locals to be the ones building in their backyard is something that truly anyone can do. If you can flip a house, you can repurpose a commercial building in your neighborhood. We have over 16,000 cities in the US that have populations of less than 10,000 people. So you can do it. And so my goal with that, I've got Local Real Estate Developers. That's a company I started about a year ago, and we're just empowering locals to be the ones doing it. We're filling in the gaps of knowledge, both working with cities and hosting workshops for communities, and working one-on-one through our accelerator course and their mentorship program for people actively working on their deals and wanting help along the way. So basically, in any way possible, we are trying to do that. And my favorite part is we've started the Local Real Estate Developer Podcast, where we just share stories of locals who are doing it, of projects small to where someone just did their first project, or someone who's done a bunch of projects and on a bigger scale, because we want to normalize and familiarize the development process, remove the gatekeeping, and get more people in.
Whoa. All right. I am definitely going to link to Kristi's podcast down below. I want everyone listening today, if you just heard the massive amount of value that Kristi just dropped today, I mean, I don't know how else to convince you that that's a podcast you should be subscribing to today. And sometimes people they might get really weird about aren't you competing against each other? No, there is so much in this world in affordable housing for everybody. If we can all help each other, if we all just didn't keep those solutions to ourselves, we could help so many people. So, Kristi, tell us more about your course that you have and how else can people learn about it?
Yeah, so the accelerator that we have, it's a 90-day program, and it basically takes my almost 20 years of experience and puts it down into, 60 3 to 5 minute videos. But the key is, when you were asking earlier about what's that checklist for dry utilities, all of that. There's 50 plus resources, checklists, templates, underwriting forms. And it's not just for, it's for any type of development, whether it's new construction or repurposing an existing building. And it's basically the training for any new team member I hire on my team. They go through that, and then they basically took a 2-year learning curve down to 4 months. And they're speaking the language, and they don't quite know it all yet, but they've got a solid foundation. So the 90-day accelerator is a way to just fast track someone into their own project. And the whole purpose, like with development, you're mitigating risks. So the way it's structured and set up is if you follow a project through the same way the course is set up, you're going to be mitigating your risk, only spending money on the parts that need to be spent on at the right time. And that way, as you go through, you keep having these checkpoints and until your deal is done. So it's literally set up to make it super simple and straightforward, and to take this complex process and go, oh, I can do it.
You can do it. That is literally the best takeaway from this podcast that Kristi has enabled. So, Kristi, how can people find a course? And I want to make sure people have the steps. I'm going to link it down below. But do you recommend them go after the blueprint first and then the accelerator? Like, how should they go and proceed through the education materials that you have?
Yeah, so we have a blueprint course that is if you're curious and you're not quite sure what development is, or even if you're interested in doing it, but you want to know what the heck, how are these cities formed? So that's more a curiosity and just to get a good understanding. If you are ready to get into development and you know that, okay, I'm ready to go. I found the dirt. I want to build this here, but I want to do it in the right order. That's your fast track. You also get one-on-one coaching calls with me throughout that 90-day period, to where we will deep dive into exactly what you need at that point in time and help take you through the process. So that's our accelerator. You can find it on localrealestatedeveloper.com. And honestly, if you search my name anywhere, then stuff will come up. But localrealestatedeveloper.com will have that. And then our podcast, we're constantly sharing stories. We have a mini-sode that we're coming out with. We have one of our mentees is working on a live deal in Idaho. And so we're tracking that, and we'll start releasing some mini-sodes on his progress of, okay, here's how the deal came to be. Here's his due diligence he's doing up there, and how he walks through that process. And we don't know the outcome of it yet because he's just getting started, but that's like every development deal anyone does. We know we have a good concept. We know we have all the stakeholders involved, and now we work through the process.
Wow. All right. I think that is just such great content, because not a lot of people share this. People kind of keep developments behind a closed current, so to speak, and they don't ever want to pull back the curtains and show how it goes, and honestly show what problems come up. People like just like, oh, I'm a developer. I built 50,000 units. Here's my big, beautiful buildings. And no one ever talks about how you even get there. Like what we covered today is just a sliver of just everything that can go on and everything that can go wrong even during a development project. Kristi, how are you growing a podcast right now? What can people do to help you grow the podcast?
So right now, and I'm someone who tried to be invisible for most of my life. And when I realized, wait, if I want to empower others and locals to get in the game, I need to not be invisible anymore. So right now what we're doing, and honestly for your listeners, if they want, growing our audience is a huge thing so we can expand our reach and help more people. So I'd be willing to throw in, if they were to like and subscribe to our podcast and share it with 3 people and send us a screenshot, we can give them access to the accelerator.
What? You're going to give away your $1,000 course? What?
If our true purpose is to remove the gatekeeping and get more people in, what better way to do it? We expand our audience and our reach, and we help get people who are on the fence active and engaged and going. I'm a big fan of, if you give away your information, if you give away your best stuff and people take action, wasn't that the whole point? And so if it can help people in multiple ways, why not?
Are you kidding me? All right, everybody, if you're listening to this right now, I would be so disappointed in you if you don't like and share a podcast with just 3 people to get a $2,000 course that Kristi has spent decades curating the information, putting that all together so that it's digestible for all of you. Please, please, please go and do this right now. And Kristi, how do they send you proof? I mean, they must be wondering, like, hey, how do I send you proof? Should they DM you? Should they screenshot you? They must be asking, like, whoa, this woman just gave us so much value, and she's going to give us the course. How do I do this right away? So how would they share the screenshots with you? What are your thoughts?
Honestly, you can either send me an email or you can DM me on any of the platforms. My email is Kristi, Kristi, @idconsulting.us. Or you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, or YouTube, wherever you can send a picture of it. Basically, whatever is the least friction to get out and share it. We do have the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And yeah, however you can get us a picture, send it over, and then we'll get you access to the accelerator, and we'll see how you can change your community.
Wow. I was already grateful when you came onto the podcast today, Kristi, but now with so much value that you're offering our community, I truly am grateful. Kristi, without people like you, I would have never had the home I grew up in. Without people like you out there sharing information, this dream of real estate development was so far away. I used to just walk by these apartment buildings thinking that's never a game for me. Mm-hmm. And people like you come out and share your information, your experience with people that you have worked so hard to amass over your career. And I'm so grateful to meet amazing people like you that are so generous with your time, your knowledge, your resources. Thank you for being such a big piece.
And thank you for doing what you do and helping do the same thing. You are getting the information out there. You're one of the most authentic people I've met, and you have such a great vision and a mission that if we can, I'm all about collaborating. I'm all about, hey, this is an abundance mindset. This is not something scarcity. There are plenty of projects to go around, and the more that we can share with others, the more that we can hold a hand back and help someone come up with us, that's only going to lead to good things overall. Because life and projects and all of this, it's not about the money. Yes, we all want to make money, but it's about purpose and fulfillment, community, relationships. And what better way to do that than to collaborate and help others come up with us as opposed to pushing them down?
There's no better way for me to start Father's Day today than to meet and talk to amazing people like you that just energize me, that gets me all jazzed up about real estate and real estate development. This has been such a great start today. And Kristi, I am so thankful you came onto the podcast today. I am confident I'll bring you back onto the podcast at some point in time just to kind of hear how things are progressing with your projects. Kristi, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate you so.
Thank you.
All right. And we are out.